climate change is real. We are going to face droughts. So the water is also now on the stock exchange. They can now buy as much water they want. Say that drought comes in 2030. That braai has got so much water, he can sell it to us for whatever price he wants to.
Government made an ad saying water is life. So how come you're taking life away from us?
There's nothing you can replace water with. Water is like the air that we breathe. If you stop breathing, you're gonna die. If you stop drinking water, you will die. But what's happening to us is we're dying slowly.
In 1994, we had between 12 and 14 million households that didn't have access to water. That's about 40 million people. And if we jump ahead to 2019, the state's own research shows that there were 3.5 million households that didn't have access to clean water. That's about 21 million people today.
Welcome to Capture This, a podcast series that shines light on failing councils, collapsing cities, and the communities at the helm of the resistance. The first episode, Shallow Justice, deals with the spectacular failure to provide the essential life force we all need to survive: water. Before we begin, please subscribe to the Capture This podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tsogo Kupa. I'm a filmmaker with a passion for social justice.
And I'm Eldonna Muhwava. I'm a human rights advocate with a background in law.
This podcast is brought to you by the State Capture and Beyond project. I'm from the Human Rights Media Trust.
And I'm from the Legal Resources Center.
And we have been working together to fight corruption and promote accountability. You're listening to Capture This. A big part of this project involved conducting research around how corruption is affecting fundamental human rights. Rights that are supposed to be protected by our Constitution. One of those key rights is the access to water. Wherever you live, we're all experiencing problems with water supply. And in this episode, we're going to look into why that is happening.
To help us, the State Capture Project commissioned a detailed research report that's just been released. To get the report, click on the link in the episode description. And guess what? The author, Jonathan van der Walt, is with us today to tell us a bit about what he found out. So, Jonathan, how worried should we be about South Africa's water issues?
South Africa is surprisingly water scarce. So when I looked it up, I was fairly surprised that we're very low down on the list of rainfall. We're about 450 to 500 millimeters a year, and the average is about 860. And that has an effect on how we manage our water. We have enough water to give everybody a decent amount of water, but to capture that, to store that, to process it, to make sure it's healthy, requires the government to put in effort. They need to have the systems in place. They need to have the infrastructure.
Infrastructure needs massive investment to build and maintain. However, that maintenance and investment hasn't come to pass over the last 30 years. Many communities across South Africa don't have access to water. Earlier we spoke to Michael Makwara, a principal in Soweto whose school hasn't had water for 3 weeks and has had inconsistent access to water for 5 years.
You can say we have almost 2 to 3 weeks, probably no water, and that is becoming a community crisis. The problem, it has started long way back. For now, it might be plus minus 5 years. Yeah, each and every person who's working here, we are all being affected. Particularly in terms of the water, it's not enough for drinking, and we end up, particularly on the learner side, dehydration is there, and some of them, of the learners, they have to take some pills, and they cannot be able to do that. As much as we do not have water, it affects the teaching and learning. because we end up on releasing the learners earlier than it's supposed to be. And this is not what we are expecting as the school. And if we do not have water and 700 learners, they have to go to the toilet just maybe to release themselves, and you are finding that it becomes more a challenge.
And this isn't a once-off issue. This happens to schools across the country. Imagine trying to focus through a school day without running taps or functioning toilets. Spesihle Masondo and Kobile Ndima live in an informal settlement, Pumla Mqashi, in southern Johannesburg, and they haven't had water for 8 months. Imagine that, 8 months without water.
Started in November. They said they've cut the water for us because we're not paying for water. We're using water illegally, and that's what we didn't even know. But if we knew, we thought maybe they will come and tell us, guys, we are going to close the water for you because you are stealing the water. Maybe we'll know better or something. But they didn't even come and tell us if they will close the water or what. But this is how we live. We don't know what's happening with our lives. We understand we don't have electricity, but we know that water is in our yards. But now it's no more in our yards. We go and drink water we used to go to Extension Tree to fetch water because it's far, but at least it's tap water. But now we come to Jojo's. We drink with Jojo, water from Jojo. And those Jojos, the lids, you can just turn it on and off. You can open if you want. You can pour something if you want. Let's share the small that we have, because now why us the poor are becoming more poor? Yes, we're not paying for water, but must we die for that? Must we not live just because we're poor? So everything is taken from us, water, electricity. That means we don't deserve anything. We don't deserve it. That's why we're becoming more poor.
As she said, we as poor, we are getting more poor. Our government is focusing on the capitalist. I remember the last time when we had vets, we talked about, there were a lot of those high people. My question was, if we have a shortage of water, how can especially, as she said, the bigger factories, the farmers, where are they getting the water? If we have a shortage of water. So you see, Uguti, the government, it's eating with those that can manage themselves. And then us, that we can't even pay for just R1 snacks. They don't even recognize us. Not to even recognize us, they don't care. Whether we do live or not, they don't. Only what they do is to deal with money. If you've got no money, there's nothing they'll talk to you about.
Spesihle and Ngobile are absolutely right. Often, your access to basic rights in this country is directly linked to your economic status. The less you have, the harder it becomes to claim what's rightfully yours. This directly contradicts the right to equality as set out in our Constitution. The irony is, we expect our government to uplift the poor, yet we often see a system that is more geared towards maintaining services for the privileged, rather than proactively providing for those most in need. While a person in the suburbs can often get a response to their water issues within a day, and the problem fixed a couple of days later at worst, a household in an informal settlement could be without basic services for months and even years with no hope for immediate respite. And it's not just Gauteng, is it?
No, it's not. It's countrywide. Earlier, we spoke to Koni Benson from the African Water Commons Collective, who details for us that there is a deeply embedded history at play.
There's been no real redistribution of wealth since 1994. And so we have democracy in name, but we don't really have liberation in practice. That's basically the deal. And part of the problem in our constitution is that private property was the deal. That was the negotiated settlement. That was the key issue of debate. So you have the right to access housing, water, education, everything that should be a public service, and you have the right to keep private property. So the human right to water is in conflict with corporate rights. So you have the mayor, for example, telling us that Cape Town allocates the most. Cape Town's the most expensive city, as we all know, and that the free basic water policy is adequate. And above that, water is not prohibitively expensive. Now, this is absolute historical amnesia, and it's not looking at the fact that the majority of households earn less than 2,500 Rand per month, that all of the global indexes show that you shouldn't be spending more than 5 to 10% of your income on a service like water.
Ugh, of course the mayor would say that. Imagine the mayor of Cape Town living on 25 litres a day. It's unimaginable. And if he did, he'd definitely be singing a different tune. As Koni mentioned, the city of Cape Town is grossly out of touch with the living conditions of most Cape Townians. So, what's the solution?
There were 5 million job losses during COVID. We have a 42% unemployment rate. Do we need what's being mined? Do we need wine, beer, the export of our juices? Or do we first need to say, what is enough? What is enough for every person to have enough drinking water, enough water to grow food with? And beyond that, we can deal with what the luxuries are.
You're listening to Capture This.
Please remember to go to www.beyondstatecapture.org.za to read the full Shallow Justice report and subscribe to the Capture This podcast channel for future episodes. Okay, Jonathan, so what would you like people who are reading the report to take away?
So we have a basic right to water, which is defined in the regulations as 25 litres a day per person. And that's the minimum amount that everybody should get. So not everybody is going to get that privilege to water, but everybody must get that basic 25 litres. Otherwise, they can't survive. 25 litres is an absolute bare minimum. It's more like the amount that you would give to someone in a crisis situation if there's a natural disaster. I'm not quite sure how they got to 25 litres as the amount they chose, but there is some scientific backing behind it because there is research on how much you need to wash hands. A toilet flush regular is about 7 litres, and no one goes to the bathroom just once a day. 3 or 4 flushes a day, that's over 25 litres just for using a flush toilet. And then you think about cooking. You don't just cook something, you probably wash vegetables. You even need to add a significant amount of water to millipap to make pap for food. So there's all these small amounts of water that add up. So you can, if you force yourself to use 25 litres, but you're compromising your health, you're compromising your sanitation to do that. And when you force people to use only 25 litres, they tend to have to make sacrifices.
According to the City of Johannesburg's water policy, qualifying underprivileged communities should receive a free water allocation of 25 litres per person per day. The scary thing about this allocation is that it was declared legal by our highest court, the Constitutional Court. So, let's talk about the case that established 25 litres as the benchmark for free water provision. Do you know how much water you use in a day?
Yeah, I probably use more than 25 litres. So it's impossible to understand why the government or the Constitutional Court thought that 25 litres a day per person per qualifying household was even close to enough. To highlight how 25 litres became the benchmark, we caught up with Trevor Ngwane, one of the first democratically elected ward councillors in Soweto in 1994. who was kicked out of the ANC due to his opposition to their anti-poor policies during the turn of the century.
Soon after being expelled from the ANC, I just increased my local activism, and then I linked up with SAMU and with other comrades who were fighting against privatization, and decided to form one organization called the Anti-Privatization Forum. I was employed as their organizer. And then one day, we got a call from Piri, the residents of Piri, complaining that there are Johannesburg water people here installing prepaid water meters.
Any idea why they targeted Piri in Soweto?
It just so happened that they targeted Piri. I think mostly because it's a poor community, also because they felt they could get away with it. It's not strongly organized, yeah. And there's always that undermining the poor. And we used our tried and tested method. So what you do is, when they install the meters, would remove them. Yeah, so they would install maybe meters in a whole block. So the following week or following month would come and pull out. So later, we're not that destructive, because at that time when we started, we're pulling out the cabling and it was mad. Yeah, but we're not anarchists in that sense. Yeah.
For some of our listeners, residents in Piri, Soweto destroying these water meters sounds like a quite drastic form of civil disobedience. But to understand why exactly this action was justified, you need to understand why these water meters were the first and most violent action against the residents of Piri by the state.
Yeah, so the problem with the water meters, the prepaid water meters, was that your allocation of 6,000 liters came at the beginning of the month. And it only came if you bought water. So you have to buy the water. If you don't buy the water, nothing comes in. And then it was not enough. So by the first week or end of the second week, your water is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the problem. Now, the Constitution says everyone must have access to water. So in theory, it means they cannot cut off your water completely. So they had another system called the trickler system, the drip system. So they put a trickler inside the water so that the water drips, so that you get some water. Yeah, but, certainly not enough to do anything. So that is what drove the resistance and the, people's anger.
What emboldened the residents of Piri to go all the way to the court with this issue?
Yeah, no, we as SCC taking Johannesburg Water to court was not our favorite strategy, because we believe in direct action. But of course, when the campaign got popular, we had many supporters coming in. And in fact, as I was saying earlier, the Piri community also were more or less independent, so they took the decision that, they want to work with the lawyers to take the matter to court. So SCC supported them because, it's their struggle. And then they successfully won the case at the Johannesburg High Court.
Someone who was also there at the time was Dale McKinley, who is currently a researcher at ILRIG, and at the time was a part of the Anti-Privatization Forum with Trevor.
So the case was then taken to the High Court initially, where we won that case. And the judge agreed that not only were prepaid meters unconstitutional, but that the 25 liters per person per day was insufficient. It wasn't necessary for human dignity, for what was needed by people. And he agreed with us in the context of at least doubling that to 50 liters per person per day. That was then appealed by the city of Johannesburg and the government to the Supreme Court of Appeals. that Supreme Court ruled essentially somewhere in the middle. It said, we're not quite sure. We think the sufficiency argument's not going to hold. And we're not sure that the constitutionality issue, but essentially it was a sort of mixed 50-50 kind of ruling where we got a little bit, but we didn't get whatever. So we appealed to the Constitutional Court to basically try to reinstate the initial High Court ruling. Very unfortunately and surprising to us, the Constitutional Court ruled in the favor of the state. Essentially, they said 25 liters per person per day is sufficient. And the state is trying to get better. They're trying to progressively realize more, and we trust them to do that. And we need to give them the leeway to do it. And even more disappointingly for us was that they said the technology of prepaid was constitutional. In other words, that it is correct to discriminate according to race and class, which we couldn't fathom, that our Constitutional Court would rule that that's what our Constitution. But that was the unfortunate result of that. But let me also say this, is that it was a legal loss, but there was a political gain. And the political gain was that as a result of those struggles and that case, the forcible implementation of prepaid meters essentially stopped. There was not an attempt by the city of Johannesburg to then forcibly implement across the board. Yes, it's still there, but essentially that stopped, and that was a partial victory.
Especially when it comes to amanzi. There are people who are amanzi for months and months and months. Same street they pay months. They hardly had drops amanzi. What all drops have to but washing at 2 a.m., which is it's not conducive. I don't think it's fair with our washing at 2 a.m. You're supposed to be sleeping by then.
Without water, there is no life, guys. But if there is no water, this is my concern.
Now, if ukuthi sizoba nama-drops amanzi ngale ndlela aphuma ngayo, which is mostly is in the evenings. During the day, people that abakhona la, they cannot, we can't do anything. We can't do washing, toilets mostly, yinkinga. Ukupheka, it's a problem. Cooking is a problem. So now we must make do with whatever drops that come out. Those tanks, honestly, they do not accommodate wonke umuntu.
Yeah, we've been making this podcast for about a while now, and sort of the subject of what we've been working on became very personal because last week I didn't have water for 3 days. And I was thinking about how sometimes you can read about these issues and think it affects some parts of the country but not your own. And then sort of I came to like the harsh reality that, you know, this thing affects everyone.
That's true. No matter where you live or how much money you make or how nice your house is, as long as you live within the municipality, you are going to be affected by the crumbling infrastructure and the issues with distribution. And yeah, I mean, after the city of Johannesburg, Rand Water, did their most recent maintenance, we didn't have water for almost 2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks?
Yeah, it's quite crazy. So you're right, it is an issue that affects all of us, sadly. And it's not just the underprivileged who are they are suffering more. They are suffering the most, you know, but point being that we should all be coming together to speak about this issue and hold our municipalities accountable because we are all being affected by the government's failures.
How did you guys cope without having water?
So we are lucky to have a JoJo tank, a small one, and it's just me and my mom. So, you know, it lasted us quite a bit, but by the time water came back, it was virtually empty. So that wasn't great. Yeah. How did you cope in your 3 days?
Our house came with a borehole. But borehole water obviously needs to be sanitized, and it's quite cold now. So every morning taking a shower was a struggle because you had to go to the tap, which granted is in our yard and not a couple kilometers away. And you still had to get that water, clean it before you could make tea, before you could shower, warm it up, X, Y, and Z. But those are really safety measures we have the privilege of having. But very much, especially on sort of the community WhatsApp group, there wasn't a lot of solidarity amongst people because the enclosure, some people had water and some roads didn't. So there was not some form of solidarity in terms of people saying, hey, if someone needs a hot bath in the cold weather, he can come shower at ours. There weren't people offering tea, this or that. It was sort of, you don't have water down the street. Sorry, I do. And people wash their hands of like each other, but there wasn't any solidarity amongst the enclosure between who had water and who didn't have water.
And did you get water tankers in your area?
We did not.
Same. Yeah. What does that say? I don't know.
As much as the water crisis affects everyone, it doesn't affect everyone equally. Most middle and upper class people are able to opt out of the state. We use private schools, private hospitals, etc., etc. However, water is a great unifier. Because water is collectively sourced, if one reservoir is dry, that means multiple communities of different incomes are affected. And therefore, it can burst the bubble of many middle and upper class people who thought themselves unique from the failures of the state. Someone whose bubble was burst in the same way was Ingrid Bester, who mobilizes mixed income communities in the fight for water justice.
So it's weird because I've only lived in Kensington for 2 years, but I've wanted to live here for many years. So I came here 2 years ago, and then I was working from home, and suddenly the water went off. And I'm like, okay, so who's my counsellor? You know, who do I call? And the guys in my street were like, I don't know, log a call. So I logged my first Johannesburg water call ever. We waited and we waited and we waited. The counsellor ignored me. Everybody was they seemed like they were okay with it. It was the weirdest thing. It was like, this is just how it is. This is just how we're going to live now. This is how you live now. And it's like, no, that's not how I live. So it was a big wake-up call for me that it was, I realized that it wasn't just me. And there are people that live in the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape and in Limpopo and there who have one tap in their village, right? That's their access to water that has been secured for them. Also, what also surprised me about Kensington, and it goes back to the complicated question, is how complicated Kensington itself is. What is also filled is 100 years, or more than 100 years worth of bad infrastructure, over-densification, zero bylaw enforcement. Where are the city planners? What's going on? And now we're dealing with the consequences. We've got 3 reservoirs, very old reservoirs, that have to supply an area that just has a vast population. Stats SA messed up their census in 2022. I mean, they think they're 30% undercounted. And I think it's more than that. So when the DWS and Joburg Water try and figure out, or Rand Water, try and figure out water allocations to water boards, I think they've severely miscalculated. And it's not sufficient. It simply is not sufficient. I was very lucky, and I've been very lucky in what I've had, and I've been very lucky to have had water my whole life. But now it's become a serious fight for water equality, for water justice, and for budget justice, to make sure that the correct money is allocated to making sure that every citizen in this country gets the water they have a right to.
After listening to what Ingrid had to say, I can understand why Jonathan named the report Shallow Justice. Please tell us more about this concept, Jonathan.
It's the idea of shallow water justice. It's this idea of sort of adjusting policy, adjusting law to kind of move the end goal of justice. So you go, oh, well, we can't really provide enough water, so we will say that enough water is actually a low amount. And then we can advertise to our voters that we have achieved results. that we have provided justice, even though they've changed the goal and they've actually not giving justice, they've redefined it in a way that removes justice.
So essentially you're saying that our government is trying not to spend money in the short term without thinking about the long-term impact of that.
That's exactly the problem. It's a very good way of putting it. It's kind of doing an easy short term that you can go, look, we've done it. Vote for us. We're good guys. We've done the work. We've helped the people, and then washing your hands of the long-term solution that would actually be more cost-effective in the end. And it's not just water where it happens, but water is a fairly powerful example of it because it's such a fundamental right.
As you've learned in this episode, South Africa is a water-scarce country. And this is why it's of vital importance that our government manages its provision of water for the sake of South African lives. Unfortunately, neglect, failing municipalities, and corruption have made something that could have been a preventable problem into a nationwide crisis. This leaves millions of South Africans in the lurch, and access to flowing water is a privilege and not a right that many can claim. Cuts to public spending have left many public sectors underfunded and ineffective, and the line needs to be drawn somewhere about what we, as citizens, shouldn't allow to be run on a for-profit basis. Water is that line, and I believe our last defense. Climate change poses a huge threat to our already short supply of rainwater, and without robust reform in water provision and access, we are at the risk of a nationwide day zero.
At the end of the Shallow Justice Report, there are a list of recommendations of what can be done to turn this water crisis around. Many of them involve active participation from everyone, and that means you. These include how to access information, how to organize in your community, and how to access public participation processes that take place in your municipality. To find the Shallow Justice Report, click on the link in the episode description. I'm Eldonna Muhwava.
And I'm Tsogo Kupa.
And this episode has been brought to you by the State Capture and Beyond campaign, which is a partnership between the Human Rights Media Trust and the Legal Resources Center in partnership with Bread for the World and co-funded by the European Union.
Please subscribe to Capture This wherever you get your podcasts. In the next episode, we'll be looking into the murky waters of how badly our municipalities are being run. Remember to follow us on social media at State Capture and Beyond, and for more tools, go to www.beyondstatecapture.org.za. Thanks for listening.
This recording was co-funded by the European Union. Its contents are the sole responsibility of Human Rights Media Trust and the Legal Resources Centre, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the European Union.